In the spirit of Halloween, I decided to go in a completely different direction. What is a ghoul, or its lesser known cousin, the ghast? It comes from Arabic mythology initially. In Arab folklore, ghouls were a weaker form of jinn, what we frequently call genies. All jinn were typically malicious, had powers of and various strengths, and had the power to shift from corporeal to the spiritual realms. Ghouls had no real power other than to occasionally follow routes through the spirit planes that the jinn had used. It was like a tunnel the jinn had created to move from one place to another, and the ghouls knew how to find and use these passages before they disappeared. Arabic ghouls lived near burial grounds and in the desert wastes. Some could assume the form of a hyena, and all were known to feed on human carrion and occasionally hunt lone humans who were far from help. Ghoul is actually the male form. The female is called a ghoulah. Female ghulas would often lure men who were lost in the wilderness to their lairs, where they would eat them. The ghoul made its way into Western literature via the translation of the Arabian Nights into French. In Western literature, initially ghouls tended to be fully corporeal, only residing in graveyards and generally lacking in intelligence. Poe makes passing reference in the poems Ulalume and the Bells. I'm going to read a bit of an excerpt from the Bells. Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells. What a world of solemn thought their monody compels. In the silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy menace of their tone. With every sound that floats from the rust within their throats is a groan. And the people, the people that dwell up in the steeple, all alone. And who, tolling, tolling, tolling in that muffled monotone, feel a glory in so rolling on the human heart a stone. They are neither man nor woman, they are neither brute nor human, they are ghouls. And it's their king it is who tolls, and he rolls, 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 a paean from the bells, and his merry bosom swells with the paean of the bells, as he dances and he yells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the moaning and the groaning of the bells. Pictured here is H.P. Lovecraft and his very famous cat. H.P. Lovecraft gave ghouls a makeover of sorts. I would call Lovecraft the father of all modern horror. His ghouls interacted with the real world as graveyard dwelling flesh eaters, but also had the means to project themselves into the astral plane and move freely to the underworld of the dead. Lovecraft's ghouls were former humans who, via depravity, or dipping into forbidden magic, became an immortal being dependent on putrefied flesh for existence. The best example of this comes from his 1926 The Dream Quest of an Unknown Cadith. It's a short novelette that I highly recommend, and you can find it online for free. Very interesting advanced concepts for the time period. Read a small excerpt from that one as well. As he discerned above him the projecting edge of the great crag of the ghouls, whose vertical side he could not glimpse, and hours later he saw a curious face peering over it as a gargoyle peers over the parapet of Notre Dame. This almost made him lose his hold through faintness, But a moment later he was himself again, for his vanished friend Richard Pickman had once introduced him to a ghoul, and he knew well their canine faces and slumping forms and unmentionable idiosyncrasies. So he himself was well under control when that hideous thing pulled him out of the dizzy emptiness over the edge of the crag, and he did not scream at the partly consumed refuse heaped on one side, or the squatting circles of ghouls who gnawed and watched curiously. The first mention of Gast that I'm aware of also comes from Lovecraft's work. Same story. His underworld, which influenced many modern interpretations of underdark type worlds, can only be reached via supernatural means and is littered with mountains of human remains. Ghasts are described as aggressive, hairless carnivores larger than a human that move along in a loping kangaroo like fashion. They move fast, hunt in packs, and turn on each other when food is scarce. From 1930 to the late 60s, ghouls would tend to vary in extremes from something more akin to what we would consider the modern zombie, as in Night of the Living Dead, to beings on par with vampires like Karloff's The Ghoul, or almost like a blend of human and demon, the Mad Ghoul. Keep in mind, in the original Night of the Living Dead, the word zombie is never used, but ghoul is. In the 70s, Dungeons and Dragons used both terms ghoul and ghast as closely related creatures. Both are undead, slightly above animal intelligence, eaters of human carrion, and created by humans, killed by either a ghoul or a ghast. The ghoul is slightly weaker and can paralyze living foes, except elves, by touch. The ghast is a slightly stronger version of a ghoul that can also paralyze elves, and due to a radius of stench, can cause the attackers to become too ill to fight. GURPS, a lesser known RPG that I'm rather fond of, made a very unusual choice for its ghouls. Their ghouls are a living race of carrion eaters. They view themselves as misunderstood critical parts of the ecosystem. They are there to make sure the human dead do not overwhelm the cemeteries. They do not hunt the living. They live on the fringes of human society and occasionally infiltrate human society to get needed items. Humans, if they saw them, would view them as creepy monsters. The ghouls themselves clearly do not look human, but are so rarely seen that most humans don't know what they look like. I find this idea very clever. That the idea that there's a race of flesh eating creatures living alongside us that we're mostly unaware of, and that have been with us the whole of our civilized history. And in a way, that's far more unsettling than otherworldly monsters.
It's on.